Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Are the mainstream media playing out roles found in the great Russian novel, The Possessed? Voicing dissent against media orthodoxies has never been more dangerous. And is peace breaking out on the Korean Peninsula? Cross-talking media madness. I'm joined by my guest, Mark Slobodka. He's an international affairs and security analyst. And we have Dmitry Babich. He is a political analyst with Sputnik International. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. I'm calling this program The Possessed because the mainstream media, corporate mainstream media, are possessed because all of their narratives, or virtually all of their narratives of the main stories that we've been covering on this program, are in tatters, falling apart. I've never seen this kind of environment, Mark. And we have an example here with Moon of Alabama, which we'll discuss I think at length, because I think it's a marvelous piece of investigative, thoughtful, intellectual journalism. Mark.
Yeah, I think we're really in a phase that I like to call shooting the messenger, because the narratives of the Western governments in both the so-called Skripal incident at Salisbury in the UK and the incident in Douma in Syria, which led to illegal U.S. strikes, U.S., UK, and French strikes on Syria, both involve alleged use of chemical weapons with no evidence, and the narratives in both cases are collapsing. Right. And this has led...
But if you point that out...
Yes. If you point that out, this is because the narratives are collapsing, the watchdogs of the regimes, the media that does stenography for them, the establishment mainstream media, has gone all out on ad hominem on the alternative media. Anyone on social media with any type of influence or following who is daring to challenge their narrative of what has happened here. And they are getting vituperative, they're getting personal, and it coincides across a whole host of people, a whole host of media, but also with Facebook and Twitter selectively banning them as well. A lot of these criticisms are
really quite sloppy and not based in fact.
Oh, it's incompetent.
It's incompetence.
I think we should elaborate a little bit for our viewers on which particular narratives are collapsing.
Sure.
Well, in Douma, the Russian journalists have found one of the boys who was on the video.
Two of them now.
You know, well, I mean, he was on the video that was shown around the world, like people sprinkling each other with water, crying chemical attack, chemical attack. Well, the boy didn't know anything about the chemical attack. He was dragged by other people who promised him food. He was dragged into that hospital. He was sprinkled with water. He's quite alive, you know, despite the fact that, you know, the Western media kept saying that these people are going to die.
Crisis actor, okay?
Absolutely. Right. With Skripal affair, we have been told by the British now that there is evidence that Russia was involved, but it was an attacking group, and all its members are back in Russia. I think the next time they do something with white helmets, they should evacuate all the actors right to France or to the UK, where international media would not be able to find them.
It's remarkable the amount of information that has been revealed about the true force behind the white helmets. It's common knowledge if you make any kind of effort, but they continue to support them in the mainstream media as a powerful good. It's just a propaganda outfit.
The point is that in all of these stories, all the witnesses are somehow inaccessible. They're in Russia, or they are somewhere else, you know, or they can't be shown because they're in danger, like Yulia Skripal. She is healthy now.
You know, Dima, the truth is dangerous in this case, okay?
Well, if Yulia Skripal has survived, if she's in good health, why doesn't she give a press conference? Why don't they show her? Okay, maybe not to the Russian diplomats, okay, to Western journalists. No, they keep her in safe location. They talk about the attacking group of Russians who are somehow all in Russia.
And we don't even know if she's being held against her will. Okay, we don't even know that. Let me give a piece here from this Moon of Alabama. This is an article, is April 21st of this year, The Media War on Truthful Reporting and Legitimate Opinions. a documentary, a really interesting piece here. Those working in the media are up in arms over alleged fake news, and they lament the loss of paying readership. But they have only themselves to blame. They are the biggest creators of fake news and providers of government falsehood. Their attacks on critical readers and commentators are despicable. And further in the article, the vicious campaign against any dissenting report or opinion is a sorry attempt to go back in time and to again gain the monopoly on truth. And this is, we've mentioned this many times on this program.
Let me give you an example. Just this week, a BBC journalist in Moscow, Steve Rosenberg, he interviewed someone named Vladimir Uglev, who claims that he made Novichok. Probably that same portion that almost killed the Skripals in London. But, as Uglev says in that interview, you will never prove it. Well, that's useful for the BBC, that you will never prove it. But somehow he spread it all over his hand when he made it, and he just quickly put it into some kind of acid. I think it was basically chlorine acid, hydrochloric acid, and all impurity magically went away. So the good thing is that
I think his hand would too, but I'm not a chemist.
Under democracy or with Democrats, you have even different laws of chemistry than in totalitarian societies, like the Russian one. Under democracy, chemistry doesn't work because you get infested with a deadly nerve agent, but you don't die. Maths don't work because, Obama said that Russian economy is in tatters. Actually, the Russian agriculture and food industry added up. But since maths don't work in a totalitarian society, of course, we all should believe Obama.
Okay, this passage that I read, that I think, they really want to regain their position as the ministry of truth here, and it is very much under assault. What I find remarkable is that we're in this media environment now because the main news providers, the establishment, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Or they have to backtrack, they have to amend.
Because they're not doing their job.
They're not doing their job. And then they want things just to go away, okay? In a number of cases, the longer you look, the harder you look, the official line is severely in doubt.
Yeah. They're not doing their jobs because they are not being critical of their own power centers, right? Which leads people to look and people to rise up on their own and start doing citizen journalism, basically, and then rising up into the alternative media, because there are no critical voices. This is why so many people want to appear, for instance, on Russian media or alternative media centers, because that's the only place where they can get a platform to voice dissent from the narrative that this media is not only doing stenography for, but is doing active defense for. And I think we need to name out some of the people that were attacked in the last week or two, because the list is quite extensive. And it's so extensive and so across the board that I think that there obviously is some pattern, shall we say here. Something is at work.
It's certainly not a coincidence.
Anil Changa and Eugene Puryear in the United States, these are both black rights activists who have been attacked by NPR, of all people, among others, just for appearing on Russian media. Absolutely. Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett. The UK academics Tim Hayward and Piers Robinson. There was a Times of London headline right on the front page against them. Big letters beneath a decision whether you're a Meghan Markle jewelry or some other monarch. Apologists for Assad working in our universities. Then the subtitle, top academics claim chemical attacks were fakes. Right, so that makes them Assad apologists. Sarah Abdallah, a prominent Syrian Lebanese social media activist. Syrian girl partisan Mariam Sousli, a Syrian Australian citizen, and Ian Schelling. By going by the Twitter handle at Ian5678.
But the reaction to these there is that what I saw, the attacks on the individuals that you just mentioned right there, they're not fact-based. As a matter of fact, they make a lot of mistakes.
They're pure ad hominem and incompetent. Craig Murray, Peter Ford, Peter Hitchens, Valentina Lisitsa, the East Ukrainian pianist, Robert Fisk.
The interesting thing is that I'd be willing to say with great certainty that the only thing that all of those people have in common, it is not Russia.
No.
It is the truth. They buck the stenographers that write for the powers that be. So, I think it's very interesting if you took at all of the views of those people.
Right,
they don't have a lot in common,
across
actually.
the board. Jimmy Dore of the very popular show, progressive show on YouTube. This is what CNN Money. Exclusive. YouTube ran ads from hundreds of brands on extremist channels, which they identified as Jimmy Dore as an extremist. Ads also appeared on the Jimmy Dore Show channel, a far-left YouTube channel.
I've been on that program a number of times.
That peddles conspiracy theories.
He is a hardcore progressive guy here. Let me give you the last word before we go to the break.
I think that we should dwell not only on the victims, but also on the people who do it. The story with Anno Changa that you just mentioned, she is a black progressive activist who was on BBC or on a lot of mainstream media channels talking about marginalization of people, talking about police brutality. Her only crime was that she twice appeared on Sputnik. She spoke to the radio, Sputnik US, in Washington, D.C., and that was enough for an affiliate of NPR in Atlanta, its author, Johnny Kaufman, just went after her for speaking to Russians, basically, even though she was not
I speak to Russians all the time. It's all right.
Though she was not interviewed by a Russian person. And he never mentioned, what he did. He called the people who had interviewed her before, and he asked them, would you have the same attitude to her if you knew that she spoke to Sputnik?
Okay, Dima, hold that thought. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on media madness. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. To remind you, we're discussing media madness. I don't know if to laugh or to take pity, but now we have the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. They're suing Russia, suing WikiLeaks.
And Trump.
And his relatives.
Yeah, right. When I first came across that story, obviously the first thing that comes to mind is that they still want to relitigate the election of 2016. I guess we're going to get that for this entire run-up to the midterm elections at the end of the year. But at the same time, the second thought that came into my mind was, well, why didn't the DNC let the FBI examine their servers? And that has never been resolved here. Is this just another fishing expedition? I mean, suing the Russian government, I don't think that's going to be even remotely possible in this case.
Okay, well, of course, this lawsuit, I don't think that you are taking this seriously enough, Peter, because the Democratic National Committee is suing for damages because, as they quite rightly point out, incredible damage was done to them, allegedly. We
don't know that. There's no evidence of that.
Well, there's no evidence of that, right? Russia and WikiLeaks, according to them, colluded to expose email that exposed that the DNC rigged their own primary against Bernie Sanders in collusion with the Hillary Clinton campaign, which had effectively financially taken over the DNC at the time. As reported by the DNC chair that took over after the previous one was forced to resign in disgrace, right? This is what they're suing Russia and WikiLeaks over?
Well, it's really interesting, Dima. You have from the left this narrative of WikiLeaks Russia. There's been never any evidence of that whatsoever. Julian Assange, everything that he's done with WikiLeaks in the last decade tells me very clearly that he would never get in bed with any government at all. And there's never been any evidence that he ever has.
That's why he was so popular.
And successful.
That's why he had so many voluntaries working for him, dozens, hundreds in different countries. But, this story, when I heard that they were suing the Russian government and Trump, sometimes when I see people suing everyone, I sometimes think, why don't you sue your parents for your being such an idiot? You know, this is the same kind of story. Bernie Sanders, of all people, you know, it was his victory that was stolen from him, and we know it from these WikiLeaks revelations, which were all true. You know, they were not falsified. They were not in any way questioned by the DNC. They are all true. But Bernie Sanders kept accusing Russia for interfering in the US election during all of the last year. Well, isn't it a defeat? Isn't it a capitulation? Instead of fighting for the victory that was stolen from you, you praise the people who stole this victory from you. I'm sorry, he reminded me of the Russian communist leader Gennady Zyuganov in 1996, who obviously lost to Yeltsin simply because he was afraid to win, you know, because at the time the oligarchs, people like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, they were not nice freedom fighters as now, you know, from their comfortable hotel. They were sinister people who could kill him if he really won, you know. That's why he didn't want to win. He didn't win, and he never questioned his defeat. Okay. This is the same story with Bernie Sanders.
But the interesting thing is with this lawsuit, it is a direct frontal assault on freedom of expression. And this is what, you know, this is the most important takeaway, because we get down, again, WikiLeaks is a media outlet. It takes itself as generating news here. This has been contested here. If this is the case, and you can equate WikiLeaks as some kind of non-state actor, then then we have this slippery slope of attacking speech. Because when we look at we had the major WikiLeaks dump that we had about the Iraq War. I mean, New York Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, everybody picked it up, okay? So are they going to be just as equally guilty because of their association or some kind of working relationship they had with WikiLeaks?
Yeah, well, first of all, this lawsuit is ridiculous, of course, right? First of all, it's premised on the idea that there's some kind of Trump-Russia conclusion. That's at least part of it, something that the Mueller investigation hasn't turned up a single piece of evidence for. So, you know, that takes us right there. It's about the midterm elections. It's all about generating headlines and continuing this broken neo-McCarthyite narrative. They think that's going to win them votes come November. I think it's going to ruin them. But this does have wider implications, not just for freedom of speech and the press, but also for whistleblowers as well, right? There is a whole history of everything from the Pentagon Papers to the Panama Papers to the printing of Donald Trump's parts of his financial record, to all kinds. Media outlets exist. A good part of what they do, and has always been, is putting information from governments, from companies, from individuals that they obtain through, you know, not completely legal means, right? Whistleblowers aren't considered legal. God knows Obama went after enough of them, more than any other all the U.S. other presidents combined during his administration. But they've always done this. And if you are now suddenly making this illegal, then every media organization in the world that does or has ever published information that they, acquired by whistleblowing or other such method.
But that's what they want. But they want to be the Ministry of Truth. I really want to talk a little bit about North Korea here. Dima, is peace breaking out on the Korean Peninsula? It's really quite amazing how the pace of this right now. I mean, let's look at the first part of the year and the kind of labels and exchanges we had with Trump and the Korean leader here. Now it seems to be going into a new direction. Will the U.S. accept a peace process that the Korean people want?
Well, I mean, just look how easily the modern West is creating enemies. And if Kim Jong-un really thinks that he can be the first one that can be kind of converted from an enemy to friend, he should look at the experience of Gorbachev, who also started his peace campaign with the United States by refusing to have more nuclear tests in 1986.
Gaddafi falls in the same category here.
Absolutely. But just let me tell you, look how the number of the West's enemies multiplied in the last 5 years alone. Russia and China have been called threats for a long time, okay. But now the EU is calling the Polish government a threat, the Hungarian government a threat.
Well,
the Turkish government a threat.
In Turkey, its greatest adversaries are its allies.
Absolutely. So if Kim Jong-un really thinks that he can be an exception, that he can make peace with the West, he is simply making the same mistake that Gorbachev made.
Mark, I think it's really interesting. I think the North Koreans learned a lot from the Iranians, because the Iranians never wanted a nuclear weapon, so they started a program so they could give it away for sanction relief. It was really smart, by the way.
And for security.
For security. But it seems to me the Koreans are doing exactly the same thing. They create a perceived threat, and then they say, okay, we'll take it off the table. We want security guarantees. But the real trick in all of this is going to be how the North and South, they negotiate their terms and conditions for a peace, because the two countries are still technically at war right now. Kim Jong-un was in Beijing recently. I think that he was telling the Chinese what they're going to do, and the deal is going back to what the Russians and the Chinese already proposed at the end of last year. And this is what's going to be.
Trump's proposal.
And Trump's going to get all the credit for it. I don't care. I don't care
Mm-hmm.
what the mainstream media has to say. If there can be a process, it should be applauded.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not only North Korea and South Korea, but of course the U.S. that's also at war with North Korea. There's only an armistice settling there. I'm not so sure that Iran created a story about the perception that they had a nuclear weapons program.
No. They were going through the motions. Yes, I don't deny that.
That was a fiction entirely created by the Western government.
But there's ample evidence that they have never actually had that as their ultimate goal.
What I think Trump is trying to take credit for some breakthrough here, right? First of all, any credit deserved goes to Russia and China for the quiet negotiations, and the new South Korean leader who is willing to actually have conversations with his North Korean counterpart, and that's the real hope for negotiations. Trump's bluff and bluster, that's everything has happened despite that.
Agreed.
Second of all, the supposed success of North Korea suddenly declaring that they're done testing, they're no longer going to test nuclear weapons or ballistic missiles, that's not because of Trump's irate tweets and threats to wipe
Pompeo's visit.
Pompeo's visit. It's due to the fact that they achieved what they wanted. They have a nuclear deterrent. The U.S. can't take that away from them without a war that would end up destroying hundreds of thousands of millions of South Koreans.
The North Koreans want a denuclearized peninsula. Well, that's going to be very difficult for the Pentagon to swallow.
If I were them, looking at Libya, Iraq, Iran,
that's why this is going to be very difficult
Syria,
to get there.
I wouldn't give up my nuclear weapons.
the China and Russia being guarantors, I think, is important in this case. We'll see where it goes.
If there was any outside influence on Kim Jong-un, which pushed him to stop nuclear tests, it was from China. And probably from Russia. It was not, pressure from the United States, from Japan.
No, I think you're right. Yeah.
It was obvious, the regimes like that, they can resist outside pressure for decades, as we know. Well, the problem is that, if you look at it from the point of view of Russia and the look that the Russian media is taking at it, we are not whitewashing the North Korean regime. It is a totalitarian communist regime, the one that we know, that we have known it for many years. But the problem is that there are many kinds of predators. There were Nazi predators, there are communist predators, and there are ultra-liberal predators who are the most dangerous now. It's like, in the animal world, amphibians, reptiles. Who are the most dangerous predators now? The mammals, the newest ones. So with the West, you have the mammal reptiles, the most dangerous ones.
The most dangerous beings are liberals. Okay,
absolutely.
They're the worst. Okay.
They are the worst because they used to have a good reputation, including in Russia, because they use the most kind of sophisticated rhetoric, and they have control over the media.
We've run out of time for our broadcast version here. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow. This is the end of our broadcast segment. Stay with us for the extended version on our YouTube channel. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules. Now for the extended version of our program where we have political potpourri. Mark, what's on your mind?
We started the regular segment by talking about these Syrian chemical attacks and this evidence that the U.S. presents, such as it is, coming out of Jaish al-Islam and the White Helmets. And Heather Nauert, the U.S. State Department spokeswoman, gave a very revealing commentary during a press interview this week when she acknowledged that the White Helmets work for the U.S. government. She said, I would like to thank them on behalf of the U.S. government for all the work they do for us. And she went on to say that, when there was a question about the funding, U.S. government funding going to them being stopped, she says, don't worry, as far as I know, they're all still getting their salaries. And that should tell you something.
That tops Nikki Haley's. I'm not confused.
Of course, the British are also in on that particular money pot. But
no, but I'm glad you brought that up, because this is how they push their agenda through these theatrics, because that's the only way that they can actually connect with a viewer or a reader. Okay, White helmets. I mean, and the fact of the matter is that you have Hollywood and you have everybody else backing it up. Oscars and things like that. I mean, it's really truly remarkable how this government money is put in pursuit of propaganda, and they're constantly criticizing alternative media as being propagandistic.
Well, I liked a headline in The Intercept this week. It was this headline: "Dear Assad apologists, your hero is a criminal, even if he didn't gas Syrians." Okay, if we follow that logic, the missile strikes were because of, supposedly because of these supposed chemical attacks in Duma and in other places. Okay, if they didn't take place, but these strikes are still justified, then if we follow that logic, then even if Assad didn't commit any crimes, he is still a criminal. This is how the ideology works here. He is an opponent simply because he exists, You don't have to prove, and they're like moving from one theme to another. Okay, chemical attacks, that doesn't hold water. Let's go to...
It's like moving the goalpost every single step. Yeah.
He is still a criminal because people did not vote freely.
You know why he's a criminal, Dima? Because he won. Absolutely. Against the greatest of odds. And that's why he's so demonized, because he actually won, Mark.
Yeah, I have never been a big fan of Bashar al-Assad.
You don't have to be. I always say you don't have to look for virtue in politics. This is part of that. The sickness of liberalism that is in power right now. You don't look for virtue.
He's a leader in the Middle East, right? The Middle East is not Scandinavia, right? Authoritarian leaders are the norm, right? You can't import Western-style democracy, such as it is, and I'll use scare quotes on that one.
But it has a lot of things that Scandinavia doesn't have,
You can't import it in and magically make it work along those lines. Bashar al-Assad, before this all started, he was the neoliberal reforming darling of the West with his wife on the cover of Vanity Fair. So I had no great love for him. He was actually moving the country away. But anything that he's done since this war has started, and they continually try to pretend that the U.S., the United Kingdom, France, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, etc., have not been waging a brutal and illegal proxy war, funding, arming, salarying,
trading.
So the
logic is that we should be bombing Saudi Arabia because of their genocidal behavior towards Yemen. Okay, no. It's never mentioned. Just one more point just on what you were saying there, Mark. But if you are an authoritarian leader, you suppress your people, you have a military junta, you have kleptocracy, but you're friendly to Washington.
But you toe the line, the U.S. foreign policy,
that's fine.
And the proof of that is that 70% of the dictators in the world, according to recent studies, are armed by the United States. And they're of course, trying to cut Russia and China out of the international arms market because they want to get up to that 96%, right? 70% isn't quite enough of them. So
it really is a racket.
This thing of demonizing Assad and pitting not just the entire Syrian government and state, but all of the people, the ethnic minorities, the Syrian Christians, the Shia, the Alawites, the secular Sunnis, the Druze, the Kurds, everyone who backs that against Sharia law and the jihadis, which is the reality of the so-called rebels on the ground. They're all demonized singularly in Assad, which is the repetitive propaganda method that the U.S. uses. Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, right?
It's the same paradigm that is used to pursue
regime change
and illegal wars.
I think that we should mention Cuba here because a new president was elected not from the Castro family, Miguel Diaz-Canel. But the problem is that the United States is in the process of undoing, the only probably real achievement of Obama's administration, which was a certain detente with Cuba. And the problem is that we don't understand what exactly do the Americans want from Cubans. Okay, there is an economic reform. The number of people who are self-employed, who are not in the government center, tripled in the last 6 years. That's an achievement. But no one is talking about that. Everyone is talking about ideology and about Diaz-Canel not abandoning the ideals of the revolution, as he said in his speech. And the problem is that no one has a real plan, and no one wants to lift the blockade.
For me, the way these neocons and liberals, they invoke ideology, it's a cover. It's a cover to justify a country denying and giving away its sovereignty, okay? What the people in Venezuela want to do, that's their business. How the government is formed in Cuba, that is their business, and for them to work out. I don't like using these, democracy and civil society, NGOs, all this stuff here, that is a cover. That denies other countries sovereignty.
Ultimately, the United States could profit economically if they lifted the blockade and restarted cooperation with Cuba.
Well, I've always said, Mark, if lifting the blockade, that would see the end of the Castro revolution probably in 6 months, okay? Because you have hundreds of millions of dollars from Cuban Americans going in, flooding into Cuba. Cuba would become a very, very different place, okay? But again, ideology always trumps rationality. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to end on that point. I hope you've enjoyed this extended version of our program, and I hope to see you next week. Remember, CrossTalk rules.